Hello all. My name is Ruturaj Patil and I'm working as a product manager phytogenics at EW Nutrition since 2019. I have an master in veterinary medicine and MBA in international business. I'm working in the animal production and nutrition business since 2005. Since joining EW Nutrition, my focus has been on phytogenic solutions. So first of all, I'm thankful to the Philippine College of Poultry Practitioners for providing me an opportunity to connect with you through this platform. So my topic of presentation is novel gut health solution for reduced antibiotic use. Thinking outside the box, improve inside the gut. So now let's see the outline of my presentation. First, we will look into antibiotics used in animal health and then followed by how the indiscriminate use of antibiotics, which can also influence new threats. So antibiotics are the substances used to kill microorganisms or to stop them from growing and multiplying. They are commonly used in human and veterinary medicine to treat the wide variety of infectious diseases. In 1928, penicillin was accidentally discovered by Alexander Fleming. Upon returning from a holiday, he noticed that a fungus, Penicillium notatum, had contaminated a culture plate of Staphylococcus bacteria, which actually he had accidentally left uncovered. The fungus had created bacteria-free zones wherever it grew on the plate. Fleming isolated and grew the mold in pure culture. He found that Penicillium notatum was proved extremely effective even at very low concentrations. In 1935, Prontozil was being marketed by a German pharmaceutical company, Bayer, which was the first effective drug against gram-positive bacteria infections and a commercial success. In 1940, gramicidin was used to treat a mass outbreak of mastitis at New York's World Exhibition. In 1948, Merck's sulfaquinoxylin was the first antibiotic to be officially licensed for routine inclusion in poultry feeds against coccidiosis. Antibiotics have been used in animal husbandry for decades with two main purposes: medical treatment or control of infections with pathogenic bacteria, and second is reduction of bacterial growth in intestinal tract, which improves animal growth by optimizing the absorption of nutrients. The latter purpose led to antibiotics being used in feed additives, the antibiotic growth promoters. And this effect was further encouraged after 1953, followed by publication of nutritional effects of antibiotics by Thomas Jukes and William Williams. Global trends in antimicrobial use in food animals actually been shown that it is projected to increase 67% of use from 63,000 tons in 2010 to 106,000 tons by 2030. And this is as per the UN Working Group on Antimicrobial Resistance of April 2019 data. So estimated global average annual consumption of antimicrobials to produce 1 kg of meat was also been recorded. But please note that term antimicrobial actually refers to any agent that kills microorganisms and inhibits their growth, not all only for antibiotics. So when it comes to chicken, 148 milligram of antimicrobials are used to produce 1 kg of chicken. For beefs, it's 45 milligram of antimicrobials are used. But when it comes to pork, 172 milligram of antimicrobials are used to produce 1 kg of pork. Now, let's look into new threats which world will be dealing with, AMR, that is antimicrobial resistance. So, how does this antibiotic resistance occur? A particular case of antibiotic resistance occur when antibiotics kill bacteria, but yet still some of them survive and learn to cope up with the antibiotic. The bacteria now grow and spread, and they sometimes can transfer their drug resistance to other bacteria and then can spread ABR even more. How AMR can also propagate along the food chain? The first it can be directly use of antimicrobials in the people, and as discussed in previous slide, AMR bacteria survive and propagate, which makes certain infections more difficult to treat. Or antimicrobials are given to food producing animals, and these animals can develop AMR. And these antibiotic resistance bacteria spread to the environment, for instance, to the farms and farm workers. Then antibiotic resistant bacteria also can be spread through the food, and from food, ABR genes can be transferred to human. The occurrence of different AMR spreads also been studied from the farm animals, and this graph shows that compared to the general population, the presence of resistant bacteria in poultry workers and their family members is high. So we should know that the poultry workers and the family members are under higher risk than the general population. In case of ESBL or AMPC producing E. coli, about 27% of the E. coli occurring in poultry workers are resistant, and nearly 15% of the E. coli occurring in family members in broiler farms. In conclusion, AMR in poultry causes increased risk of exposure to resistance bacteria for poultry workers and their family living in close proximity. Now let's look into how this AMR outbreak can have impact. The major impact of AMR can lead to risk to food and feed production. It can also have impact on the business and trade, and also interaction with climatic change. The increased morbidity and mortality in humans and animals also can be seen. There can be economic damage as well as loss of productivity and increased healthcare expenditures. If you see worldwide, major common reasons of death, astonishingly, AMR is already contributing 700,000 numbers among the major causes. According to the United Nations Interagency Coordination Group and Antimicrobial Resistance, the 700,000 deaths caused by drug resistance bacteria each year can slash about 100 trillion US dollar from the combined gross domestic product and additional 210 trillion US dollar from secondary effect. And this number could increase to 10 million deaths per year by 2050 if business would continue as usual. By 2030, animal resistance could force up to 24 million people into extreme poverty. Now, a big question in front of us would be, how many deaths do we need before the nation takes serious action? And we also know there are key challenges in implementing antibiotic reduction. The first is lack of awareness and lack of political will to act. People are not connecting AMR to threats to food, health, and environment and economics. Presently, many countries need a stronger narrative that can engage both policymakers and the general public by linking AMR to national interests such as food, health, environment, and economic development. Financial cost, a lack of will to provide initial investment to prevent infections and offer sustainable access to antimicrobials. Public and private sector finance is required to build the systems and support infrastructures to prevent infection in the first instance, and they enable sustainable access to use of antimicrobials. Third is about coordination across countries, industries, private and public sector. A lack of human, technical, and financial resources combined with complex logistics and ways of working, hampering coordination and across both sectors and stakeholder groups. Monitoring requires setting up a complex systems. Few countries have their own monitoring system, and even fewer have incorporated this into wider health and agriculture systems. Data and technical capacity, there is a very little information available on AMR, and obtaining is very costly and complex. Countries need data on antimicrobial resistance use and access, but science in these areas is expensive and complex, and many countries lack the technical capacity and know-how to analyze such data and develop data-informed action. But good news is AMR risk can be mitigated. And in fact, it can be reversed quickly with responsible use of antibiotics. Now let's look into some positive case studies. Netherlands, both antibiotic use and antimicrobial resistance has been monitored for more than 20 years from 1999 to 2019. In this study, commensal, that is non-pathogenic E. coli bacteria, are isolated from the ceca of slaughter birds and cultured. The cultured E. coli bacteria are ideal indicator pathogens to quantify occurrence of AMR in the gut environment, as they easily exchange AMR genes and can be isolated from all production animals. This graph looks maybe very complex, but let me simplify for you. First, focus on the columns, and this shows the therapeutic use of antibiotics, which is under veterinary prescription. And in preparation of 2006 AGP ban in Europe, there was an increased therapeutic antibiotic. But through legislative pressure, antibiotic use in production animals dropped by 69% from 2009 to 2019. As a consequence of this reduction in antibiotic use, the antimicrobial resistance was reduced more or less 50% across different classes of antibiotics. The study indicates that once bacteria are not being challenged with antibiotics, eventually they will phase out AMR genes and become susceptible again. This is one example, but there are other examples from Denmark, Belgium show similar relation between antibiotic use and the resistance pattern. Important to mention, this reduced percentage of resistance is also associated with an improved response to antibiotic treatment in broiler flocks and increase the effectiveness. So antibiotic reduction leads to a less resistance bacteria. Another case study from US. In the USA, during the last decade, consumer demand for antibiotics-free chicken supply has increased. The shift in consumer demand has pushed broiler meat producers to manage broiler farms with least possible antibiotic use. The unclassified reports from US broiler industry indicate that the no antibiotic ever production system has grown from last few years. The definitions of the terms here is full spectrum of antibiotics which are legally allowed by FDA. Second is a non-human antibiotics being used like inophores, bacitracin, avilamycin. Third is only inophores where no BMD or other drugs are used. And then the fourth category is no antibiotic ever, means no antibiotics including inophores ever during the bird's life. And we can see that there is a clear shift towards NAE broiler production, which has reached to the 40% of US broiler production level by 2017. And the current trends shows that it is still growing over year and year. So practicing AMR mitigation, it's a way forward. But the point of antibiotic reduction is not to discourage people from using antibiotic, but on the contrary, to make sure that antibiotics remain effective. This can only happen if unnecessary use of antimicrobials is lowered at every touch point. Lowering antimicrobial antibiotic use can be done by a set of holistic measures whose point is to preempt the need for antibiotic use. If animals enjoy good health, solid growth rates, good feed conversion ratio, there will be no need for the animal production industry to embrace AGPs or rush to apply high dose of antibiotics. So the way forward can be support for animal health and welfare, look into cost-effective measures to prevent antibiotic needs, and reliable monitoring for threats. So in animal nutrition, one of the important steps to deal with AMR mitigation is linked with increased use of novel gut health solution. So phytogenic compounds are defined as a plant-derived natural bioactive compounds with positive effects on animal growth and health, and are often applied to essential oils, botanicals, and herbal extracts. Some phytogenic compounds are known to have antimicrobial, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidative properties, and they have traditionally been used as a complementary or alternative medicines to improve human as well as animal health. However, phytogenic usage benefits are found to be variable due to different compositions and concentration of actives, what kind of synergy they can bring together with different modes of action, and having a standardized phytomolecule composition can ensure consistent benefit. Importantly, the active ingredients need to be tested for thermostability during the feed processing, and also release or availability at the right site in the intestine. The formulations need to be proven and supported by controlled and commercial trials to substantiate consistent benefit in different breeds and management practices. Key benefits of phytomolecules in gut health can be led by phytomolecules' antimicrobial property, which can hinder growth of potential pathogens. Phytomolecules also possesses antioxidant and anti-inflammatory property, which can prevent loss of gut integrity during enteric challenges. So to look into a different phytogenic feed additive at EW Nutrition, some of the key benefits of phytomolecules been tested at EW Nutrition Innovation Center. So this is a in vitro study where the differential antimicrobial activity was tested. So in this test, agar dilution method was used, and one of the phytogenic feed additive was tested. So in the first row, we can see the Clostridium perfringens plates were being used with a different concentration of phytogenic additive, starting from 0, or we can say positive control, and then the dose was increased to 500 microgram, 750 microgram per ml to 1000 microgram per ml. We could able to see a very clear dose-dependent response. By increasing level of phytogenic additive, there was a clear decrease in the growth of Clostridium perfringens. Even 750 microgram per ml was good enough to control the visible growth of Clostridium perfringens. But when this same phytogenic feed additive was used even at higher dose, 25% concentration, for other beneficial bacteria like Lactobacillus species, like Lactobacillus agilis and Lactobacillus plantarum, there was a minimal effect was being experienced. These in vitro results indicate a unique benefit of phytogenic feed additive having a stronger antimicrobial action against Clostridium species than Lactobacillus species, which helps to develop the gut microbiota in right direction. Now, the next mode of action will look into antioxidant activity. So to measure the phytomolecule feed additive, antioxidant activity was tested with test called ORAC, Oxygen Radical Absorbance Capacity Test. In this test, the compound's antioxidant capacity was compared to vitamin E analog. So as we can see, the phytogenic feed additive being tested at different concentration, and at all tested concentration, it showed a stronger antioxidative effect than vitamin E analog. So better antioxidant effect led to better gut antioxidant status and barrier functioning, which also ensures a better gut health status. Next is about anti-inflammatory activity. So to measure anti-inflammatory activity, we collaborated with the experts from Utrecht in Netherlands. So this test was done with murine macrophage cell lines, both in unchallenged positive and negative controls. And the challenge was given with lipopolysaccharides at 0.25 microgram per ml. And then phytogenic feed additive was used at two doses, 50 ppm and 200 ppm. We used NF-kappa B and interleukin 6 and 10 cytokines as a biomarker for measuring anti-inflammatory activity. In the graph on the left, NF-kappa B activity was been tested. So as we know, NF-kappa B is known to increase inflammation. So higher the NF-kappa B activity, higher the inflammation. So as expected, in positive control, the NF-kappa B activity was too low. When it was being challenged, the NF-kappa B activity was significantly increased. But when it was being supplemented with phytogenic additive, it could show a dose-dependent response with statistical significant reduction. Another biomarker which was used, IL-6 versus IL-10 ratio, and IL-6 is known to increase the inflammation and IL-10 is known to decrease the inflammation. So the right representation of inflammatory response is higher the IL-6 IL-10 ratio, higher the inflammation. So as I expected, again, the challenge control has shown a very high IL-6 to IL-10 ratio. But when it was being supplemented with phytogenic additive at two doses, we could see there is a dose-dependent reduction in IL-6 to IL-10 ratio, also statistically significant. So this shows that the phytogenic feed additive has been proven to have a stronger anti-inflammatory benefit, which is also useful to control the excessive inflammation can be exhibited during the gut challenge conditions. Now let's look into some validation studies of this phytogenic additive in target species. So to improve or to test this additive, we did a test in USA with 880 Cobb 500 birds. In control, there was no gut health additive was used, and in other group, the phytogenic additive was used at 100 gram per ton. We had two groups, 11 replicates and 40 birds in each replicate. To induce the gut challenge, used litter from previous batches was used with high fiber diet. Trial was continued for 42 days. So as a result, we could see there was a 2.6% reduction in the mortality with phytogenic additives supplementation, which was also statistically significant less. It was also tested for gut lesion score, and at age of day 21, the broiler birds supplemented with phytogenic additive showed a significant less gut lesion score, which is nothing but a less inflammation. And we can correlate this benefit of in vitro test of anti-inflammatory benefit of this additive. Another parameter, as an average body weight, we could see there was a significant improvement with 170 gram higher body weight in broilers supplemented with phytogenic additive. And in FCR, there was 3-point improvement in FCR. Another test was being conducted to test the phytogenic additives benefit in high performing broilers with 396 male at ROS 308. Control, no gut health additive was used, and phytogenic additive was given at 100 gram per ton. The design was similar with two groups, 9 replicates and 22 birds each group. Trial was continued for 35 days at Jordan University. So as a result, in the mortality, we could see there was a 1.6% reduction with phytogenic feed additive supplementation. Body weight was almost same in both groups, but there was almost 3-point improvement in phytogenic feed additive supplemented group. And as a result, we could see there was around 21 points improvement in EPEF in phytogenic additive supplemented group. So as a conclusion, we can say AMR is the next bigger threat to the world. And the personnel working in animal industry are under higher risk for AMR spread. But the good news, AMR can be countered with responsible use of antibiotics. And to do that, phytogenic feed additives can be alternative and effective tool to manage the gut health. So now let's pledge and try to play a big role from our side by promoting use of novel phytogenic additives and effectively promote more responsible use of antibiotics and protect our mother earth. So that with that conclusion, I would like to say again, thank you. Thanks for your patience listening. Thank you very much.
Good morning, I'm Arlene Marcelino Opelanio, and I'm going to share with you specialty ingredient maximization, rebound for feed cost reduction during post-pandemic in broiler and layer diet. A very special topic for this Poultry School Online 2022. For the table of contents, I'm going to share with you the background of the study, frameworks, methodology, results and discussion, conclusions, and recommendations. The world needs to produce 1,250 million tons of meat per year to meet global demand for animal-derived protein at current consumption levels by the year 2050. The growing demand for protein will not be met sustainably by increasing poultry meat and egg production due to low-efficiency feed conversions. The alarming rate of cost of proteins and energy based on nutrient costs has increased, and demand for high-performing feeds with ingredients replacement and availability at hand for poultry operations. The more challenging scenario in hitting the least cost feed to produce a kilo of meat for broiler operations and eggs for layer operations due to all-time high raw material prices and availability for animal nutrition under post-pandemic has been consistently being managed in the industry. The situation has created demand for the most innovative feed formulation in maximizing the specialty ingredient with single-cell protein as a protein extracted from microbial biomass. Researches of the applications of SCPs continuously validate the precise nutrition requirement of the birds, and the single-cell protein is a highly consistent source of energy, protein, and amino acid proven and tested both on scientific and commercial researches. Bacterial SCP has high nucleic acid content, especially RNA. This specialty ingredient has high nutritional value both from digestible energy and metabolizable energy with greater nutrient digestibility as a replacement of high costs protein sources. The validations revealed SCP as the most strategic nutrient tool in addressing the gap between the high volatile prices of raw materials vis-a-vis with broiler production efficiency and efficient layer production. The concerns for sustainability and resiliency is the most strategic business model for food security under post-pandemic scenario. The global demand for high-quality protein-rich foods will continue to increase as the global population grows along with income levels. Poultry is the fastest-growing animal protein industry. Protein supply poses a problem since essential amino acids cannot be replaced. Rapidly increasing world population generates the challenge of providing necessary food sources, and increasing world deficiency of protein is becoming a major problem for humankind. The nutritional value of a protein is determined by the amino acid composition of 20 amino acids, which are commonly found in dietary protein and cannot be synthesized by the animals, and thus essential that we need to supply them. Plant protein is converted rather inefficiently into meat protein. 6 kilos of plant protein is needed to produce at least 1 kilo of meat protein. Increasing meat production to match the growing demand is ultimately not sustainable. However, growing demand for protein will not be met sustainably by increasing meat and dairy production because of the low efficiency of converting feed to meat and dairy products. New solutions are indeed needed. SCPs or single-cell proteins products, protein meals based on the microbial or algal biomass have the potential to fulfill this need. SCPs, as we all know, are dried cells of microorganisms which are used as protein, extracted from pure and mixed cultures of microorganisms like yeasts, bacteria, fungi, and even algae, grown in large-scale culture systems. And the term SCP was even coined during 1966 by Carol L. Wilson. Contains fats, carbohydrates, nucleic acids, vitamins, and minerals rich in certain essential amino acids like lysine and methionine, which are limiting in most plant and animal foods. Provided through the cultivation of various microbes and algae, containing more than 30% of protein in their biomass with healthy balance of essential amino acids. SCPs are also being produced using a variety of raw substrates from inexpensive agri-industrial byproducts and used in poultry feed as an alternative protein source to soybean meal or fish meal. Our research problem: how to maximize single-cell proteins as alternative protein source in broiler and layers. For our research objectives, first, to maximize the nutritive value of single-cell proteins. Second, to use SCPs as alternative source of protein, energy, and amino acids in broiler and layer diets. And third, to consistently use these SCPs for us to have higher broiler production index and better layer farm efficiencies using SCPs under post-pandemic scenario. To give you an idea on how these SCPs are being produced, This is composed of 4 steps. First, preparation of nutrient media, followed by cultivation, including solid-state fermentation. Third is the separation and concentration of SCP drying. And fourth, final processing of SCP into ingredients and products. These are the sources and key substrates of SCPs, coming from single-cell production from fungi, single-cell production from bacteria, and even single-cell production from algae. To give you a clear picture on the comparative nutritive value of SCPs, we have identified the components from true proteins, total nitrogen, lysine, methionine, fats and lipids, carbohydrates, bile pigment and chlorophyll, nucleic acids, mineral, salts, amino acids, ash, moisture, and then fiber. As you can see, the highest percentage of true proteins are coming from bacteria, followed by at least algae and then fungi. But take a look on the total nitrogen, composed of protein and nucleic acid. The highest is coming from bacteria. The lysine is also coming from the highest, fungi, and then bacteria. Now, let's take a look on the comparison in terms of various parameters for SCP production. We have identified few like growth rate, substrate, pH range, cultivation, contamination risks, sulfur-containing amino acids, nucleic acid removal, and then even toxins. Among them, the most challenging is really coming from fungi or yeast, which is practically quite high in terms of growth rate, followed by bacteria. But in terms of substrate being used in the production, bacteria and fungi would have a wide range of using this kind of products. But in terms of pH range, 5 to 7 is both coming from bacteria and then fungi. Now, it's very important for us to understand how to maximize this with our applications for all our broiler formulations. This is a very recent trial entitled Growth Performance, Carcass Traits, and Gut Health of Broiler Chickens Fed Diets Incorporated with Single-Cell Protein. This is a comparative analysis in terms of amino acid content of different protein sources, single-cell protein, fish meal, and then soybean meal. Take a look on the lysine level. Almost the same with regards to fish meal, but almost doubled with regards to soybean meal. How about methionine? Methionine is quite lower as compared to fish meal, which is 19.7, but the soybean meal is also higher. Look at the threonine. This is 32.5, and tryptophan, this is 18.5. So these are the sets of amino acids that is practically higher in terms of percentage when you compare it with fish meal and soybean meal. This study used starter phase, grower phase, and finisher phase with this respective nutrient analysis. Curd protein at 22%, ME at 3,000, methionine 16 at 0.86, CP at 21.5, ME at 3,050, methionine 16 at 0.76, and CP at 19.5, and ME at 3.1, and methionine 16 at 0.70, respectively. Now, let's take a look on this performance in terms of growth performance of broiler diets. This showed with the dose response trials, you have the 7.5 and 10% dosage that would give you a more or less very economical and most effective way in terms of monitoring body weight, feed intake, and FCR. And this is statistically significant among each treatment. Another one, monitoring is carcass characteristics and organometric data, measuring the breast, the wings, the thigh, the abdominal fat, the meat and bone ratio as well, with the liver, with the heart, gizzard, and the bursa, and the spleen, and the thymus. This also showed that it has to be matched with the high performance indicator coming from 7.5 to 10% usage of single-cell proteins. Another one is the length microbial count and pH of small intestine. It's very important for us to take a look on the surface area coming from this ratio of the difference coming from duodenum, ileum, and jejunum. Together with the microbial count, still it's the same, coming from 7.5 to 10% percentage usage in the formulation. Another one is the intestinal morphometry, the one that I've been discussing. The villi to Crift ratio, we have the highest coming from the 7.5 and the 5% this time. Another trial, replacement of soybean meal with yeast cell protein in broiler ration. The effect on performance traits. Starter phase is 23%, ME is 3115, finisher phase 20.5, CP and ME is 3335. What does this mean? In terms of production performance, the FCR value is coming from 10.5% of the yeast cell protein. On the other hand, with regards to effect of replacement of soybean meal with YSCP on mean dressing percentage and mean mortality and mean weight of liver, gizzard, and heart, this showed that at 10.5%, still the mortality is almost zero. Okay? Now let's take a look, on the other hand, the applications of SCPs in layers. Effects of dietary inactive yeast and live yeast on performance, egg quality traits, some blood parameters, and antibody production to shape RBC of laying hens. What does this mean with regards to the trial? As we can see, the comparison between inactive yeast and live yeast, we have a very good performance coming from the usage of inactive yeast with regards to feed intake, hen day egg production, egg weight, and even FCR. The table 2 would give you a clear picture on the effects of dietary supplementation of IDY and live yeast on the egg quality, characteristics, and egg yolk cholesterol concentrations in laying hens. Another table would give you a clear picture on the dietary supplementation of IDY and live yeast on anti-SRBC titers and blood serum parameters in laying hens. Still, with the use of at least 1% coming from inactive dried yeast, this is better as compared to usage of live yeast. Another trial is feeding value of SCP produced from dates for laying hens. And this was conducted for 16 weeks of age of our layers, okay, during the rearing period. As you can see, we had used 0, the control, 5, 10, and then 15. This gave us a clear picture that at least with regards to feed conversion ratio, with the FCR, have at least 5% coming from this level. Another table would give you a clear picture on the effect of feeding different levels of SCP yeast derived from dates. As you can see, with this value of the HO unit, we have at least a 10% usage of SCP. On the other hand, the effect of feeding different levels of SCP derived from the date syrup on some egg quality traits, still, at HO unit, you can see the highest is coming from 10. Now, what does it make sense to be maximizing this kind of alternative proteins nowadays? We all knew it. Everybody is being challenged on how to produce a very minimal cost of operations, but a very good performance at all. Not all single-cell proteins are the same. Not all. And the only way for us to monitor this is the importance of the digestibility of its amino acid per se. Near-infrared spectroscopy or the NIR data would dictate the consistency of this kind of raw materials. I am sharing with you the lists, the data we generated under Philippine condition for the past 5 years of these single-cell proteins in the market. We measured lysine level, threonine, methionine and cysteine, tryptophan, methionine, and then isoleucine. As you can see, the levels of its content is extremely consistent. And these were monitored through the years. Another one, leucine, phenylalanine, valine, histidine, arginine, and tyrosine. Still very consistent for 5 years monitoring. Another one is serine, alanine, aspartic acid, glutamic acid, glycine, and then proline. It's very important for statistical analysis to monitor the coefficient of variation. And according to our data, this generated only at 1.63%. So, if it's very minimal, this would give us a clear picture that not all SCPs are the same. You have to monitor your NIR data. For our recommendations and conclusions, since NIR would be the best parameter for you to identify the most strategic tool in terms of maximization of costs with its production performance, single-cell proteins are highly concentrated and highly digestible source of energy, protein, and amino acids as the most strategic nutritional tool and alternative for proteins for rebound and feed cost reduction formulation under post-pandemic scenario. Thank you.
Hello there, we're back. Hope you had a great coffee break. For now, the third paper to be presented for this morning plenary session is Understanding the Principles of Biosecurity for Better In-Farm Compliance.
Okay, so let us go on to our third presentation this morning. Our third speaker earned his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine at the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. He held several local and international positions in private companies like San Miguel Foods Incorporated, Beringer Ingelheim, Vet Medica, Pfizer Animal Health Philippines, and Synbiotics Corporation. Currently, he is the Animal Health Product Manager of Evans Vanadine International. In spite of his very busy corporate duties and responsibilities, he finds time serving the Philippine College of Poultry Practitioners as the chairman of the technical committee. Ladies and gentlemen, our very own Dr. Fernando Robert G.U.
Good day, participants of the 2022 Philippines Poultry School Online. My topic today would be understanding the principles of biosecurity for better in-farm compliance. This is very important because it's only when you understand what composes the principles of biosecurity can you truly better enforce compliance within the farm. Because as we all know, compliance is a big issue when you want to implement biosecurity. Before we do that, we'd like to first understand the role of biosecurity among the different programs which we have in farm to prevent the transmission of infectious diseases. Okay, as you can see in this triangle, biosecurity together with vaccination and medication are important pillars on how we prevent infectious diseases. But we have to take note that among the three, biosecurity is the only truly broad spectrum program, because unlike vaccination and medication, where those two programs are specifically targeted against specific diseases, biosecurity, when done properly, is a truly broad spectrum program because it can prevent the transmission of many diseases of infectious nature. So biosecurity are all steps that must be taken to prevent livestock or poultry from infection. It's a fully integrated approach, not only about disinfection. We believe that prevention is better than cure, and I can show you later how to prove that biosecurity is a truly commercial program and not just a cost. However, it must be a lifestyle, but luckily the rules are global. And going to biosecurity, we now start to define the principles of biosecurity, and this definition came from the FAO OIE Biosecurity Manual for highly pathogenic avian influenza in 2008. Briefly speaking, it defines biosecurity in three principles. Segregation, which is the creation and maintenance of barriers, any barrier to limit the potential spread and opportunity of infected animals and contaminated materials to enter an uninfected site. It also involves cleaning, where you have to remove most of the microorganisms that are contaminating the materials. And finally, the final principle, disinfection, where properly applied, disinfection will inactivate any microorganisms that is present on materials that have already been thoroughly cleaned. As you can see at the bottom, there are several factors that can make disinfection less efficient. And if you rank all these three principles, you will notice that segregation is the most important principle, followed by cleaning. Yes, cleaning as a principle is more important than disinfection. And disinfection, for some of the reasons I said a while ago, is the weakest link. A perfect example of these principles in motion is what we are doing today with COVID-19. As you can see with all the media, how do we prevent COVID-19? Wear a mask, social distancing. Those are all principles of segregation. What's the other thing our health authorities advise us? Wash our hands. That is basically cleaning. If you notice, we don't really push a lot of disinfection in the control of COVID-19. It's mostly segregation and personal hygiene. Okay? And similar aspects can be applied to a farm. A perfect example would be a poultry house, which you may have cleaned and disinfected perfectly. Okay? But if during the downtime, somebody who was not decontaminated suddenly enters the cleaned and disinfected house without good segregation, then all the cleaning and disinfection has gone to waste. Now, a key point which we have to remember, when we say we have a program, even a biosecurity program, or most especially a biosecurity program, it must be documented. A program is not a program unless it's in black and white. Okay? So many practices out there, they say they have a biosecurity program, but in reality, everything is done verbally. And for me, that is not a program because everything is only verbal. And that leads to a lot of issues of non-compliance. So one factor to ensure better compliance is to document all biosecurity practices in black and white. Okay, so let's now talk a bit about segregation. And if I mentioned earlier, segregation mentions the prevention of movement of anything that can transmit disease. We're basically talking about vector management. And vector management is basically a critical control point, or in three letters, CCP. Okay? We can broadly divide poultry farm biosecurity into 9 critical control points, which is farm location, entry control of people, entry control of supplies and vehicles, feed and water quality, management of materials, equipment, and their maintenance, proper livestock housing and control, which includes pest control and, very importantly, bird proofing, area separation, a good cleaning and disinfection program, and of course, good vaccination, medication, and treatment program. You can look at the bottom picture where you can see more specific possible vectors of infectious microorganisms. But having said that, I won't discuss all the management of the 9 critical control points, but briefly touch on several which I feel is quite important, especially when we are looking at avian influenza control. Okay, so going back to farm location. Farm location is something very important, especially when you want to expand or build a new farm. Farm location is also a critical factor why in today's Philippine outbreak of avian influenza, we have issues. And if you tie back historically, all the initial incidences of avian influenza, it's all due to farm location. For example, in the northern Luzon area, central Luzon, specifically the Candaba Swamp, it says in farm location, we want to avoid wet areas with high humidity. We want to avoid an area which is downwind of a potential site of other farms or close to other areas which could have high pathogenic load. We want to build a farm away from an area which is close to wildlife or areas where they frequent. We need to have an area where we can dispose our waste properly, and our staff housing inside the farm, in fact, the entire farm, should have efficient hygienic drainage and sewage. And if you look very closely, the Candaba Swamp does not fulfill any of these. So it is no surprise that the farms around the swamp, mainly Bulacan, Pampanga, and a bit later Tarlac, are always in a high challenge situation, especially in the cooler months where migratory birds start to come to the Philippines from other countries. And these migratory birds, as we all know, are vectors for avian influenza. This is another example of poorly designed farm with poor farm location because you have backyard chickens next to commercial stock. So one basic principle of biosecurity, for example, in this particular outbreak of avian influenza, has already been highly compromised with the farms surrounding the Candaba Swamp. However, as any of you who belongs to any operation who basically tries to practice basic biosecurity, and you can agree with me that most of biosecurity management practices, maybe 70 to 80%, deals with people or the critical control point of people. Because people are a major cause of transmission, and people are the ones who have the greatest chance to break, to break the chain of biosecurity. And why? Because it is people who have the greatest frequency of going outside the farm. Our chickens don't go outside the farm. They only enter the farm at day old, and they only go outside the farm when they are harvested or culled. And therefore, people, being the number one vector who goes in and out of the farm, are the greatest cause of transmission. But it's not enough to say that, okay, you and me, our farm workers, suppliers, and any other visitors are the greatest critical control point. If you notice, while we have many practices in basic biosecurity to manage people, we actually have not explained the reason why we are letting our staff do this. For example, when I was in the farm over 20 years ago and I joined the farm, they told me, take a shower. And I did it faithfully, diligently, maybe 4 times a day. But there was no actual reason saying why I must take a shower. And I tell you, among our staff who are not as well educated as us, if we're not looking and they don't like the practice we are forcing them to do, then when we are not looking, they are not going to follow. So we have to explain. We have to explain more properly this principle of people management. And we can do this by being more specific, by identifying the specific critical control points on the human body, which have the greatest risk of transmitting microorganisms. And number one would be footwear. Okay, footwear, because footwear is in contact with the environment 24/7. So there are many ways to handle this. Okay, we can have what we call personal protective equipment, like this picture. We can call this guy Mr. X, okay, or Professor X, for those who like the X-Men. But what do we do most often? We do have people have foot bath, and we also sometimes practice change of footwear. And all of these are done to handle the CCP of footwear. Having said that, what many farms are lacking are management programs to handle the hands, okay? Because while footwear is in contact with the environment 24/7, it is our hands where we work with. We work with our hands. We handle the birds with the hands. We vaccinate with the hands. And sadly speaking, many farms do not have a management program to manage hands. My recommendation is wherever you have a foot bath, you need to have a hand wash, okay? The other CCP on the human body is the clothes. And finally, hair, or in this particular case with Professor X, the lack of hair, okay? So if you notice, one program we do for more advanced farms, which is shower in, shower out, and change uniform, handles all these specific CCPs on the human body. And that's how we should explain to our workers that it's not because we let you take a shower to give you a hard time, but because we are handling the specific critical control points on the body which can transmit disease. Just to highlight the importance of hand management, okay? We have a trial done in Penn State Extension University where you have somebody who did not wash his hands and put his hand on a blood agar plate. And you can see all the growth on the plate. In fact, you can probably see that on his index finger, he has some sort of ring or ornament. It could be a wedding ring, engagement ring, whatever. But it also carried microorganisms. Same person who just washed his hands with soap. On the right, you can see the massive decrease of microbial load. Okay? So what Safeguard said in their commercial, that washing your hands with Safeguard removes 99.9% of germs, is true. But take note, as I will explain later in the disinfection step, that 99.9% reduction, which is 3 nines log 3 kill, is not enough to be defined as disinfection. Okay? So hand management is very important. And this example perfectly illustrates why we should do it. And in fact, in today's environment, it's much easier to implement hand management. You don't even have to say avian influenza or Newcastle disease. Just mention to the worker, wash your hands because we want to prevent COVID-19. And they can understand because hand management has been extensively advertised as a health control measure for COVID-19. So we have a particular diagram showing the proper flow of people. So on the right, we have basically the dirty area. In the middle, at the changing zone, that's where we do, and maybe a shower zone, that's where we shower and change and notice the facility for hand washing. As you can see in the picture on the right, which a picture I took in Denmark. In each broiler house in Denmark, which I visited, there was a very nice, nicely designed hand management station where you control the flow of water with your foot, and you have a alcohol gel dispenser immediately beside it. And after going to the changing zone, you can now go to the green zone or the clean zone on the left. And most importantly, you have to be very particular that the flow within this entry decon point must be one way. Sadly, I've seen many farm design where the flow is not one way, where the person enters and exits the decontamination zone in the same area, and that's very poor people control management. Okay? You must always record all visitors because you can actually do better epidemiological studies if you have a good record of all the visitors. Now, that's people, right? So now we go to the other management procedure or vector which goes in and out of the farm, and that is vehicles. Okay? Ideally, outside vehicles should not actually be allowed inside the farm. If you look at one of the major adjustments from our colleagues in the swine industry with African swine fever management, if you go to most farms now, everything goes outside. Everything. So even the marketing of piglets, the delivery of feed, marketing piglets, the buyers don't even go to the wall of the farm. Before, as we all know, there was a marketing area at the border of the farm where the finished hogs go out and are bought by the buyers. These days, everything is pushed outside, even farther, where the finished hogs are brought to a marketing area outside the farm. And in many farms, feed delivery is not even until the gate, but it's done away from the farm. And it's only the farm vehicles who are allowed to get this feed and bring them inside the farm. In poultry practice, there are still many operations that allow third-party vehicles to enter the farm, such as feed vehicles, such as manure collection vehicles, and many times also the buyers. And I tell you, this is extremely, extremely high risk, especially if you don't have proper vehicle management, okay? For vehicle entry control, we need to use full vehicle disinfection procedures, okay? And we should also manage not just the vehicle, but also the driver and the handlers together with the vehicle, okay? If you look at the picture, for me, that's the better design for in case the vehicle has to enter the farm, have a vehicle decontamination point. If you go to the next slide, these are examples of a couple of vehicle disinfection control points. A picture on the left is a picture I took in Indonesia, okay, where you have a worker, probably untrained, just simply spraying this truck with the chicken crates. So what's the problem here? This is very popular in many farms here in the Philippines. Is this the right or wrong practice? It's actually wrong. Why? Because if you notice, the guy who has probably not been trained, as I mentioned, will not be able to totally disinfect the entire vehicle. Remember, vehicles, just like people, have specific critical control points, most particularly the tires. And in this particular picture on the left, he will not be able to spray the inner part of the tire, okay? But if you think about it, it's actually the entire vehicle, not just the tires. That's the critical control point. A much better design is the one on the right, which I took as a picture from CP Thailand, one of their feed mills, where you have like garage with lots of sprayers. You may not see it here, but there are also sprayers underneath this vehicle, which gives a total 360 field of disinfection for the entire vehicle. So this is better. What I will show you in this short video with no sounds is actually what they done in China, basically for African swine fever control. But it's worth mentioning that this is a very highly advanced, and for me, a much better way to totally clean and disinfect a vehicle. So if let me play it. So you here have a vehicle that is potentially carrying a lot of viruses. And in their system, the vehicle decon center is away from the farm. Here you have the interview of the driver, and the people with the truck undergo full decontamination. And here you have the vehicle, the internal cab is being wiped and disinfected. And the outer part of the vehicle is also washed. After the initial rinsing and washing of the soiling material, the vehicle then moved to the cleaning and disinfection center. Here, they do foaming with detergent for longer contact time, very similar to the car wash we have here in the Philippines. After 15 to 20 minutes, the car is rinsed away of the foam. Okay. The truck is then physically inspected for cleanliness. And at a higher level, which I will explain later, the truck also is measured for residual ATP, which tells you if it's cleaned or not. Then after it's dry, it's disinfected. But in this particular case, foaming disinfection, which gives better contact time. And now we have a process called stoving, which is a highly advanced, more advanced procedure where the truck is exposed to 65 to 75 degrees of hot circulating air. Here you have thermometers to measure the temperature. And this is done for 45 minutes to ensure that viruses like ASF or maybe Newcastle disease or even influenza are killed, because these viruses are sensitive to hot temperature at 60 degrees at 20 minutes or more. And with this particular vehicle decontamination center, you are much more reassured that if this vehicle has to enter the farm, it is not carrying any pathogen. Okay? So that is basically me talking about the two most mobile vectors, basically people and vehicles. But of a particular aspect for avian influenza and also Newcastle disease and maybe also infectious bronchitis is the aspect of bird proofing. Because as we all know, wild birds are known vectors of avian influenza, other birds, and these birds can also carry ND, cocci, salmonella, fowlpox, and etc., other viruses. So all efforts must be made to bird-proof a poultry farm. So if you're a conventional house, we need to invest in fish nets. In other countries, they invest in other means such as lasers and sound devices to scare away the birds. Okay, but the best investment for bird proofing is proper housing. If you look at the bottom 4 pictures, it's a picture of a very nice broiler farm in Denmark. It's the same poultry house where I took the picture of hand wash station. This is not a new farm. This is a 20-year-old farm. Denmark is an example of a country where that does not have a lot of diseases. They have no Newcastle disease. They have no IBD. Okay, they do have sometimes outbreak of AI. But as you can see, in a typical broiler operation, if I was a salesman selling vaccines, I have nothing much to sell to this operation because basically they don't vaccinate in the farm. And you can attribute that to their excellent biosecurity. And if you look at the houses, remember, in Denmark, they are very strong proponents of animal welfare. So broilers and even layers are not caged, and they need to have access for grazing and ranging going out. In this particular house, if you look at the bottommost right picture, that is actually the grazing area, and you can see several panels on the wall of the house. And when the house is full of birds, they open these panels, and the birds have freedom to go out and range in this area. But even then, in the ranging area, if you take a note, there it is bird-proof properly. On the bottom left, I just would like to point out, this is their form of rat proofing, where in between houses, they have white, round-like gravel stones, not as small as gravel bits, but a bit bigger. And this is very useful to prevent against rats because rats don't like to walk in the open on a white background because they're scared of migratory or predatory birds catching them. And they don't like walking on this particular kind of stones. For them, it's uncomfortable on their feet. Okay, just showing you examples of good rat and bird proofing in other countries. Okay, so let's now go to cleaning and disinfection. Okay, so I first discussed some aspects of segregation. Now we go to the second half, which is cleaning and disinfection. Okay, it's basically a 6-point program. Animals out, remove all equipment, remove most organic matter manually. Then after you do this, you soak and foam the building and equipment with detergent and rinse the remaining organic matter away, allow to dry. For Western countries like what you call in UK, everything is done by third party. And because they practice an all-litter system, this step is done very, very quickly. And soaking and foaming the building with detergent is actually SOP. It is part of any modern cleaning and disinfection practice. Then once the house is dry, you apply disinfectant, do not rinse off. Then you can either re-disinfect or fumigate or load. In fact, in this particular farm, which I took the picture in the UK, the entire cycle from harvest to loading with the next batch of chicks was just 7 days. Okay. So let's talk about cleaning. Cleaning is actually a scientific process involving 3 energies. Sadly, many companies do not actually talk to farms regarding the science of cleaning. But I'll do that today because that's a very important principle which you must understand that you must do properly to have a good biosecurity program. So the first aspect of cleaning is we will talk about the energies involved, and that is basically 3 energies. Mechanical energy, and this is done in the farm with the use of a pressure washer, power sprayer. Okay, the power sprayer is there to let water be the medium to apply mechanical energy. So water is the medium to apply mechanical energy. And as we all know, the stronger the pressure, the better the cleaning, because we have more energy. Okay, so we need energy to clean. Okay, what's the second energy? The second energy we apply, or should apply, technically must apply, is chemical energy. Okay, and the third energy is thermal energy. Okay, all three must be in balance. Why do I say that? Because if you only use mechanical energy, that has several disadvantages. First of all, mechanical energy, for all the water we put to apply mechanical energy, water does not dissolve fat. And all chicken manure has fat. Therefore, if you only clean with water, you will always be leaving a fat layer inside the farm, which can interfere with the disinfection step. The second aspect, if you only use mechanical energy, is like I told you, to clean better, we need more energy and thus more pressure. But if you do that with only water, what happens? We are actually creating contaminated aerosol, because all the dried manure, which could contain IBD, ND, is now in the air, like an aerosol, like when we cough with COVID-19. And if the house is open and there's a strong gust of wind, it can spread these microorganisms around the house, and worst comes to worst, even to the other houses. Okay, so how do we reduce mechanical energy? We apply other energies by applying chemical energy or soap. We all know that if we apply soap, the water pressure does not have to be as strong. Okay, because now we have chemical energy. Okay, and finally, if you can afford it, hot water is also a big benefit to cleaning. As a guide, every 10 degrees rise in temperature, in centigrade, let's say from 30, from 20, doubles the efficiency of the chemicals and cleaning process. So from 40 to 20, 2 times 2, 40 degrees is 4 times more powerful at 40 degrees than at 20 degrees. Okay. Now, we look specifically into chemical energy. And we can look at it into 2 ways. Okay. Chemicals, we view chemicals in the cleaning process from the first aspect of their pH. Okay. So, as we all know, in terms of pH, we have either high pH or alkalis, or low pH, which are acids. Okay. So, alkalis are best used to clean fat and protein, because alkalis, they saponify fat, making it water soluble, and they dissolve protein quickly. The problem with alkali, we cannot use that to clean calcium deposit, because it actually precipitates and creates more calcium. On the other hand, with acids, they're not good. That's not a good pH to clean fat and protein. But acid is the way to clean mineral salts. Okay, so when we descale the water lines, we use acids. Please remember this, because this aspect will have a factor when it comes to formulation for farm disinfectants. And just to show you how detergents clean, the other way to look at it, the other way to look into chemicals is now on a specific chemical we use for cleaning, which is surfactants or detergents. And the detergent looks like a lollipop, where the head of the detergent is the lollipop. Okay, the head of the lollipop is the water-loving part, while the tail or handle of the lollipop is the non-water-loving or water-hating part. So what happens? The tails attach to the fat, and because the head is water-soluble, it starts to lift the fat from the surface, and now we have globules of fat lifted by the detergent, which is now ready to be washed away. And this graphically illustrates how a detergent molecule removes fat from the surface. Therefore, using detergent is a must. It's necessary for good disinfection afterwards. Now, going to cleaning, specifically, as I mentioned, the ways to clean is pressure washing with the water only, which is the old way. Even then you do pressure washing with soap, which is better, of course, because you have chemical energy. But since you're already paying for the chemical, a much more efficient way is to foam with it because you're already spending for it. So let the chemical work longer for you. And you can only do this if you foam, because if you foam it, it sticks to the surface and has longer contact time. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, too much pressure washing is a critical control point because it can contaminate other parts of the house or the farm. And therefore, proper cleaning and having the right cleaning system is important. In order to do this, we need better equipment. Okay? This is the old style of power sprayer, which I call saliva sprayer, because if you apply a foam lance, it's like spitting saliva, very weak. A better machine is the one on the right, which the Karcher machine, which gives much better pressure. To do foam cleaning, we need a pressure of at least 1000 psi or 70 bar. Or if you do it like other countries like the UK, you have this very big piston pump, which they just bring to the front of each house. And each of these pumps have 2 to 4 long hoses, and you can do work very, very quickly and do proper foaming and washing afterwards with these machines. Okay, so foam cleaning, as I mentioned, is very efficient. I just want to show you how fast foaming is. I do have to apologize since on the video on the left was just a demo. This procedure is not actually the most perfect one, but you can see that proper foaming, the detergent will stick properly to things like metal cages and plastic slats, or these plastic auger feeders, and done properly, like the one on the right, who is very well trained in the UK. The application is very, very fast. And how do you measure cleaning control? Besides visual inspection, you can scientifically measure it and quantify it by using an ATP meter, because ATP detects residual protein. ATP comes from protein, and therefore a high reading, the one on the left, bottom left, with almost 12,000 is a fail, and a much lower reading of less than 1,000 on the right is a pass. We did this swabbing in Denmark. Okay, the one in the bottom left is actually the UK. So with this, you can have a more scientific way to measure your cleaning and decide whether you can continue with the disinfection step. Going to disinfection actually has a definition. If you remember me saying a while earlier that safeguard is only a log 3 kill, in Europe, disinfection is defined as a log 4 kill or 99.99% reduction of viruses for viruses, and a log 5 kill, which is 99.999% for bacteria. Okay? Okay? And you cannot just do this kind of test in a clean condition. To fulfill the log 4 and log 5 kill, you must have a disinfectant for farm use, which is full spectrum. It must have a test against avian influenza, and the test must be designed similar to European norm, or what we call EN conditions. Briefly speaking, all these tests to achieve the log 4 and log 5 kill must be done with organic soiling, must be done with hard water, because remember, many farms are in hard water condition, and must be done at cold temperature, because as you will see later, cold temperature slows down the activity of disinfectants. Hard water is defined as 300 to 350 ppm of calcium. And against AI and ND, must achieve a minimum log 4 kill versus viruses under those conditions. Now, we use disinfectants like iodophores, glutaraldehyde, biguanides, phenols, peroxygens, and quaternary ammonium. We just have to keep note that not all are broad spectrum. Quaternary ammoniums and biguanides in particular are just bactericidal because they need to act on a cell wall, okay? And they're quite sensitive to organic material. Phenols are very powerful, but because phenols come from petroleum, they are not allowed in Europe, and they are polluting because they come from petroleum. So I recommend your farm, if your farm wants to be known as a green company and not polluting, don't use phenols. But luckily, we have chemicals like iodophores, peroxygens, glutaraldehydes, which are broad spectrum. Each has their strength and weakness. For example, glutaraldehydes are non-corrosive. Peroxygens act very quickly but are corrosive, while iodine is a very good disinfectant that's quite also broad spectrum, but it could be staining. So we have other options now, many options to pick for the use of proper disinfection. But the most important aspect is that no matter what you pick, the farms must be formulated to be able to handle what we call the interfering factors which are present in a farm condition. Remember, we are disinfecting a farm which has a lot of organic soiling, which has a lot of surfaces which can absorb microorganisms, unlike your house or the background picture, which is full of tiles and non-absorbent material. In the farm with manure and cement, we have to make sure the disinfectant is formulated to penetrate. The other big difference in the farm is we mix disinfectants in the farm. In fact, the dose of disinfectant in the farm is very low. 1 to 200, for example, is only 0.5% disinfectant product and 99.5% water, which could be hard water, which could be dirty water. So the farm disinfectant must be able to handle the water quality used to mix with it. We have also temperature as a factor, but luckily us in the Philippines, with hot temperature, we have an advantage because hotter temperature makes the disinfectant react faster. The problem with temperature is cold, as I mentioned earlier, where at cold temperatures it slows down. Hence, tests in Europe for disinfectants must be done at 4 to 10 degrees. So how do we make sure the farm disinfectant can handle these conditions? We formulate it properly. And the most important agent there is a surfactant. The surfactant is very, very important, to make sure the solution breaks up and wets the entire surface. And the surfactant is very important to penetrate soiling and absorbent surfaces. Because keep in mind, for modern farm disinfectants, surfactant technology is carrier technology. So if vaccines, with killed vaccines, for example, the quality of adjuvant determines the quality of the vaccine. In a similar way, surfactant technology determines how stable and penetrating a farm disinfectant can be. The second one you have to add to a farm disinfectant is a buffer agent, which handles hard water. If you remember earlier, I said that acids is the way to dissolve calcium. So for many disinfectants, acidifying the solution helps it resist water hardness and extremes of pH. Some disinfectants also have stabilizers. And we call these disinfectants formulated disinfectants, which is really necessary for farm use. We cannot use just say pure formaldehyde or pure chlorine because these are unformulated disinfectants. They won't last long and they won't penetrate and they won't be able to handle hard water. So going back to disinfectant dilutions, a most important aspect I want to say is that while we have what you call international bodies which say, oh, use chlorine at this ppm or iodine at this ppm, you have to keep in mind that this is basically done for what you call ease of use purposes. But in terms of effectivity, I would prefer that we follow the European approach. And in the European approach, like in the UK, information and the dose is not based on this kind of references. For the UK, for example, the UK DEFRA, Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs, they actually have to test each brand individually to get the correct dose, let's say against AI or ND. So even if two brands have the same formulation, the UK will say, no, we cannot have the same dose. We will test your product one by one. And believe it or not, products with the same formulation have different doses. Okay? So they test with EN standards or UK DEFRA standards. And you can actually see this online where each named product has a specific dose against ND, for example, against FMD, against SVD. Okay? And this test is done by reputable labs with EN testing conditions. And for an outbreak like avian influenza, that is very, very important because many generic companies do not actually test their products at what dose they actually work. They probably will work, but we don't know at what dose. Okay? So application, there are many ways to apply disinfectants. The old way of application is through spraying. Then you can do wet fogging on the bottom left, spraying. Just make sure in whatever you do, the entire surface is covered, okay? In Malaysia, they like to do hot fogging with certain chemicals like glutaraldehyde. And another modern way, an advantage of having a surfactant in a disinfectant is that disinfectants with surfactants will foam. So as you can see, foaming also gives contact time. And when you foam with disinfectant, you don't wash afterwards, okay? And foaming is especially important, like in the video I showed you of the truck wash for metal surfaces, because you have longer contact time. And how do we measure disinfectant, if disinfectant was done properly? Today, we have swabbing for bacteria, where we check for specified standards to see if proper disinfection was done. Okay. Now, having said that and looking at all the principles, how can we have better compliance? There are two ways to do it. One way is we can now quantify overall farm biosecurity because there are many checklists now. We can audit your biosecurity system holistically. And this, a properly designed checklist, will take into consideration all the principles we talk about: farm location, people control, material control, vehicle control, disposal, and factor this in the checklist to have a point system. And by doing so, you can now have a biosecurity score. And by having this particular tool, you can actually use this as a commercial program by comparing your score to cost effectiveness. Okay? So what you do is you do an initial checklist, find out your score, then maybe 3 to 6 months after, you score again, and you will notice that if your biosecurity score goes up, your efficiencies should also improve. And this was actually proven from a trial done in the University of Ghent in 2013-14 in a published paper by Laanan and Jolod. One was done with broilers, one was done with swine, pigs. And in their paper, improvement in biosecurity scores resulted in decreased antimicrobial use. Actually, the objective of this study was to see if improved biosecurity can reduce antibiotic use, and it did. Biosecurity scoring over a period of time with performance parameters were measured, as I mentioned. And then we showed the average reduction of antibiotic use. It also showed the decrease in mortality, in better FCR. Okay, although it was a small study, I tell you, this helps justify that even if you compute the improvements with this particular paper, you can already see that by investing in biosecurity is actually a cost investment. It is an investment, it's not a cost, which will lead to better efficiencies and better profit for the operation with less diseases in the future. And this shows that biosecurity is actually a truly commercial program. The other way we can do with checklist is having it done operationally, meaning your daily activities for done within the farm. So what you do is things you do in farm as proper documentation, you do a checklist. For example, when you do cleaning and disinfection, have it done in a checklist format. In this particular way, you can ensure compliance of your program, and other checklists can also help monitor and manage other aspects of the farm besides cleaning and disinfection. Only if you do that can you actually have an auditable program, which is very important today for better compliance. And with that, thank you, and I hope you had a good rest of the day today. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have just presented to you Dr. Fernando Robert G. Yu. The fourth paper to be presented for this morning is the review of Clostridiosis in poultry.
Okay, to continue, our fourth speaker earned his Doctor of Veterinary Medicine at the University of Los Baños and topped the Philippine Veterinary Licensure Examination in 1999. He pursued his Master of Swine or Master of Science in Poultry Science at Mississippi State University, USA. He worked as technical and marketing manager of MSD Animal Health Philippines and the regional poultry technology lead of Cargill Animal Nutrition, and currently the regional head of technical services of Kemin Animal Nutrition. Ladies and gentlemen, help me to welcome Dr. Alexander C. De Leon.
Good day, I'm Alex De Leon, and I'm here to talk about a review of Clostridiosis in poultry. For this, we're going to run through on the bacteria itself, Clostridium perfringens, and the disease it causes to poultry. Then we're going to talk about necrotic enteritis, the disease itself and how it is linked to microbiota, and what are the different modalities that we can use so that we are able to control and prevent necrotic enteritis. So going first on the bacteria. So Clostridium perfringens is a gram-positive bacteria that is able to form spores. And it is commonly found in the gut of animals and also in the environment. And this bacteria is mostly known for the toxins that it produces. And these toxins evolved actually not to cause disease to poultry. It is actually evolved to produce these toxins to have its function in the environment. Clostridium perfringens actually is one of those bacteria that actually helps in the decay of living matter in the environment. And to date, Clostridium perfringens is classified or categorized according to the 7 major toxinotypes. It's going to be A to G. And classically, we know that the alpha toxin, the type A, toxinotype A, which is the Clostridium perfringens that produces alpha toxin, is the one that is being linked to necrotic enteritis in poultry. Clostridium perfringens causes a lot of major gastrointestinal diseases in domestic livestock, which includes avian necrotic enteritis. And don't be surprised that you can see a lot of Clostridium perfringens in the gut of chicken. So it's about 70 to 95% of broiler chickens have this bacteria in their gut. Just a little history on Clostridium perfringens. It was first called Bacillus welchii, and then when they saw that it was nearer to Clostridium, so they changed it to Clostridium welchii. It was first isolated from these chickens that's on your screen. It's called Black Orpington pullets in Australia, and they found that it consistently causes the disease if you give this bacteria chickens. And it was actually first called a 6-day disease. Now, necrotic enteritis is usually divided is either clinical or subclinical. But in the field, this is seldom a clear-cut clinical or subclinical form. Usually, it is in a continuum. So usually, it would be a clinical form, then going into a subclinical form. But what is known is that the subclinical form actually is more devastating economically to the industry than the clinical form. Because the subclinical form, the chickens are still there, they're still eating, but they're not growing as expected, making, FCR go higher, days to harvest becomes longer. And worldwide, it's estimated to be costing the industry about $6 billion per year. And some estimates that I see is about 0.5 cents per bird. Clostridium perfringens causes hemorrhagic necrosis in the intestinal mucosa. Depending on the degree, it can be simple patches of necrosis, hemorrhagic necrosis, to you can see that the whole intestinal wall is stripping away. And damage to the gut, of course, when you damage the gut, it's the primary organ that would digest and absorb nutrients. So you get poor conversion, and also when we saw lately that when in-feed antibiotics are pulled out of feed, the cases of necrotic enteritis, even coccidiosis, actually cases went up. And there's a correlation between the amount of Clostridium perfringens load in the gut on its manifestation. So usually when Clostridium perfringens load is 10 above 4 or less than 10 above 4, it's normal. You can have there your commensal Clostridium perfringens and your pathogenic ones, but if their load is about less than 10 above 4, then it's pretty normal. Again, if you remembered earlier, about 75 to 90% of chickens will have Clostridium perfringens in their gut. Then once you get into that level of 10 above 4 to 6, then it will not probably show some signs. Then would be the level when you say you have subclinical form of the disease, where you see reduced growth and reduced feed efficiency. Then once the number is above 10, above 7 to 9 CFU per gram, then you see that clinical cases of necrotic enteritis, where you have increased mortality, depression, dehydration, the classical form of necrotic enteritis. Today, what we know is that the Clostridium perfringens that carry the NETB toxin is the one that consistently produce diseases. And NETB is actually the one that is now regarded as the one that is causing the lesions. That NETB is a protein. It is a pore-forming toxin. It punches holes into the cell membrane of the chicken cells, which causes ionic disbalance in the cell, eventually leading up to the death of the cell. And the NETB producing Clostridium perfringens are actually what we call the toxinotype G. This is a study done by the group of Dr. Rob Moore in Australia. And this actually is a very good case to present that it's not the alpha toxin that is essential to virulence, but actually it's the ability of the Clostridium perfringens to produce that NETB protein. Again, that NETB protein is that pore-forming molecule that will punch holes in the cell membrane of your intestinal cells. So what Dr. Rammour did with this group is they took the wild strain, this would be these red dots, and they produce mutants, this green one and this yellow one, without that NETB gene. And you can see that when you delete the NETB gene in this wild type of or the field strain of Clostridium perfringens, you don't produce lesions. They went also to a next step where they got Clostridium perfringens that they deleted the alpha toxin gene. And you can see that if the Clostridium perfringens still has the NETB gene and you delete the alpha toxin, this Clostridium perfringens can still produce lesions. So it means that there is direct correlation between the presence of the NETB gene and the ability of Clostridium perfringens to develop the disease, to develop necrotic enteritis. And even if you delete the alpha toxin gene and you have that NETB gene, that Clostridium perfringens will be able to cause the disease. And what is interesting that what we know today is the NET gene positive Clostridium perfringens can be found both in diseased birds and also healthy birds. And we do not know today that if the NETB gene is present, it does not preclude the bacteria producing NETB gene. So even though it carries that gene, it doesn't mean that it will express that gene. We still do not know what will be the trigger for Clostridium perfringens to make that NETB gene and that NETB protein. But it is clear that the Clostridium perfringens carrying the NETB gene, when you put it in vitro, it will be the ones that is most likely to produce the toxin. But again, it remains unclear what activates the, what is that signaling system that promotes the release or the formation of that NETB protein, or the expression of the NETB gene to produce that NETB protein. And I won't go into details from this on this because this is something that this is how we score necrotic enteritis from a healthy gut of 0 to a point of 6, where you have that stripping away already of the intestinal epithelium. Now, going deeper into the predisposing factors for for necrotic enteritis. Now, infection with Clostridium perfringens generally is not sufficient to cause necrotic enteritis. Experimentally, you really need to have an initiating stimuli before you get that necrotic enteritis lesion. Usually, they would use Eimeria, or they will challenge the bird first with coccidiosis, and then challenge this bird with that Clostridium perfringens with the NETB gene, or they can use high levels of protein meal or meat meal, and then they can use they up the level of sodium bicarbonate. This will actually be good predisposing factors to show necrotic enteritis. So again, what is important is to note that generally you need something to initiate Clostridium perfringens so that it will develop into necrotic enteritis. So what are these predisposing factors that will cause the bloom or proliferation of pathogenic Clostridium perfringens, the one that is carrying that NETB gene? So you can have changes in the immune status of the bird. If you get inflammation in the intestines, then you make your gut leaky, then it can cause proliferation of Clostridium perfringens. Or you can have physical changes in the gut that damages the gut, so that it will cause proliferation of Clostridium perfringens. Or if you have disruption of microbiota, then you can have actually a bloom of your pathogenic Clostridium perfringens. And what is important is you can see that the arrows here, that this these factors actually do interact. A disruption of the microbiota can cause physical changes in the gut, or a change in the immune status can also make changes cause physical changes in the gut, or a change in the immune status can definitely disrupt your normal microbiota. So digging deeper, so for example, when you have a Myria infection, it causes inflammation and then you get changes in the immune status of your gut. Or Eimeria can directly damage epithelial cells as it replicates along the intestinal cells, and then it causes changes into the gut. The gut, because of the damage, will produce a lot of mucin, and this mucin is actually the one that makes the Clostridium perfringens bloom. Or when you have drastic changes in the diet, it can actually disrupt microbiota. And this is something that we are looking into today, because of the high raw material prices, shifts in the raw material profile of the feed can actually change or disrupt microbiota. And it is because when you change so much the raw material profile, again, I want to say that it's changing the raw material profile, not changing the nutrient level of the feed. The nutrient level of the feed can still be the same, even though you are changing the raw material profile. So rapid changes big changes in the raw material profile of the feed actually can cause disruption in microflora, and then cause physical damage to the gut, and again you get bloom of Clostridium perfringens, because you can imagine that each raw material will produce different substrates inside the gut, and depending on the substrate that is available, certain groups of bacteria will bloom, some will be decreased, and it's just because you have differences in substrates. Or if there is a time that the chickens did not get feed, or you're skipping a day, that absence of feed in the gut can actually cause physical damage and also disruption on microflora. Quality and also quantity of water can also affect physical properties of the gut and also can disrupt microflora. You can also have environmental contamination. If biosecurity is loose, your flock is your farm, your houses are negative. It doesn't have Clostridium perfringens with NetB gene, but there is poor biosecurity. The Clostridium perfringens carrying the NetB gene is able to enter the farm, then it can cause disruption of the microbiota. It can also, displace your commensal Clostridium perfringens, and again, you get that bloom of Clostridium perfringens having the NetB gene. Now, complicating it more, you can see that viral infections, even the breed, some breeds might have might be more prone to changes in the immune status of the gut. Of course, viral infections will change the immune status of the gut. We've talked earlier about Eimeria infection damaging the gut and also affecting the immune status of the bird. When you have a higher number of non-starch polysaccharides and it is not controlled in formula, then you get viscosity, increase in viscosity of the intestinal content, and then you get physical changes in the gut, which can lead to bloom of your pathogenic bacteria, because when the ingesta becomes more viscous, transit time along the gut becomes lower. Now, I am not saying that wheat is a bad ingredient or barley. Barley also is known as carrying a lot of NSPs. If the point here is these ingredients are good. High ingredients with high levels of non-starch polysaccharides are still good ingredients, but you just need to know how to handle these ingredients in formula. That is why we have enzymes to degrade NSPs. Mycotoxins, of course, we know, can also make physical changes in the gut. It can also disrupt microflora. You know, too high protein, or too high fish meal or meat and bone meal can also disrupt microflora, because when you have so much protein in your diet, then not all of these proteins can be digested and absorbed along the upper gastrointestinal tract. It will flow to the lower intestinal tract, gets fermented there, and then you get disruption of the microflora. You get bloom of bacteria that might not be favorable for the gut health of the chicken. Then you get Clostridium perfringens. So there's a lot of predisposing factors that you need to look into when you are trying to decipher what is actually causing that bloom of Clostridium perfringens. That's why you're seeing necrotic enteritis in the flock. So, drawing you back a little on microbiome, microbiome is something that is, it's very relevant today. There's a lot of talk about microbiome, and there's still a lot of things that we need to know about microbiome. But one thing is for certain, the profile of the bacteria inside the gut will have a direct effect on the quality of the bacteria inside the gut. So when you talk about microbiome, you're talking about the quality, but at the same time, you're talking about the diversity. So the higher the diversity, so it means the more bacterial population there, the more number per bacterial population, the more stable, the better your microbiome will be. Also, on the other side of the coin, you also want to have the right bacteria present so that you are able to see good performance out of your flock. Now, the three circles you are seeing on your screen right now, this is a microflora profile of the duodenum. B would be the cecum, and C will be from fecal matter. The outer circle will be representing a flock that has good SCR, and the inner circle will be a flock that is poorly performing. And you can see that depending on the relative amount of certain bacterial species, in this case lactobacillus in the duodenum, will lead to better performance of the animal, lower performance, and will be more equated of less lactobacillus in the duodenum, and also higher number of Bacteroides would probably result to lower performance in animals. And you can see that same trend with the cecum and the feces. Now, I'm not saying that higher number of lactobacillus will be good, because not all lactobacillus are equated with good performance, as well as higher number of probably Clostridium and even E. coli. There are some E. coli that is not pathogenic and actually is equated to better performance. So that's why we're seeing today that there's still a lot of things that we do not know about microbiome. But what we know is, first, diversity is very important. Second would be this slide. If you have more population, excuse me, of that good bacteria, beneficial bacteria population is higher, then it will be gearing towards more on better performance. So it's both quantity and also the quality of the microbiome is going to be important. Okay, so just want to emphasize on microbiome further, on the changing of the diet. So changing of the diet changes microbiome. Like I said earlier, because when you have big changes in the raw material profile of your feed, then there is big shifts in the substrates that is available for the bacteria inside the gut of the chicken. In this example, you can see that as you decrease plant polysaccharides and you increase your meat meal or your fat, it will pull more your bacterial profile to the bacteroides pole. While you increase your plant polysaccharides and you decrease your animal protein sources and fat, it will pull it to the probatella pole. So you can see that there is uh, the profile, the raw material profile of the feed will actually change from what pole of population the microflora will be. Okay, so case in point. So today we have we cannot help having so much changes in the raw material profile of the feed because of high raw material prices, and we know that when raw material prices are high, it's like a three-headed monster. It's high, the prices are high, the availability also goes low of raw materials, and then quality also decreases. So with high prices comes hardships in procuring raw material, and also generally raw material quality also decreases. And you can see that formula today will have so much changes in raw material profile between phases, and that this actually causes a lot of problems when it comes to gut health, because it has a big impact on the profile of the microbiome in the gut of the chicken. So things that we can probably consider will be having longer transition period, so that you slowly introduce new substrates into the microbiome, so that the changes will not be that abrupt, and the changes in the microbiome will not be that abrupt also. Or you can also use molecules to generally control microbial flora that actually shifts it into a more favorable population of bacteria. Okay, so we see a strong interaction between Clostridium perfringens and the host microbiota. Clostridium perfringens, of course, it interacts with the host, and Clostridium perfringens also will interact with the microbiome, and also the microbiome of the chicken interacts with the host itself. Because your microbiome is actually correlated with digestion. It is correlated to build up of the immunity, maturation of the immune system, and also on immunity. Also, your microbiome, it has that pathogen exclusion. If you have good bacterial population, it is excluding bad bacteria to attach to attachment points along the gut of the chicken. Good microbiome can also have that barrier function for you. And lately, we are also seeing that, like in humans, the microbiome affects the gut, and the gut affects the brain on how we think. And this is something that is little done in chickens, but there's a lot of schools of thoughts out there that somehow they're thinking that the microbiome is also influencing how chickens think. Now, we go to the final part. We are now into that space of how do we control necrotic enteritis. I will not be here to tell you guys that necrotic enteritis, there's a magic bullet. There's no molecule that can replace antibiotics. Antibiotics, in using antibiotics, what is good about antibiotics is that antibiotics suppresses the whole microflora. Both good and bad flora, it suppresses it down so that it manages bloom of good bacteria as well as bloom of bad bacteria. But it is not sustainable. Before, there were also vaccines against alpha toxin, but now we know that those vaccines will not be that effective because now we know that it's not the alpha toxin that is important for Clostridium perfringens to cause necrotic enteritis, but it's actually the presence of the NETB gene and the expression of that NETB gene. We can look into probiotics. We can look into things that will feed good bacteria so that it will make blooms of good bacteria. We can also modulate microbiome into higher quality bacteria that is beneficial to the bacteria to the chicken with phytogenics or MCFAs, short chain fatty acids, or essential oils. But it's just the tip of the iceberg. You can replace antibiotics with molecules, but it's not a foolproof thing. You have to look into what is below the waterline, and it's the bulk of actually the cornerstone of controlling necrotic enteritis. It is grounded still on the basics, which is good management, making the chickens have an environment where they are comfortable. You need to manage the litter properly, not overstocking your houses, and also the correct feeding of these chickens. Nutrition-wise, today we know that the higher the nutrient level is not necessarily better for chickens. Because when you feed too much nutrients to your chickens more that they can handle, more that they can digest and absorb in the small intestines, it will flow into the large intestine. The chickens will not be able to use that nutrient anymore once it's in the large intestine. Somebody else will use it there. And usually it will be the bloom of bad bacteria. There was a paper by Dr. Oviendo Rondon, and he's actually bold enough to say that most of the enteric diseases that we see today is actually failure in giving animals the right amount of nutrients. It's going to be more of us overfeeding nutrients to the animals more than they can handle, and because it's more than what they can handle, it flows into the large intestines, and somebody else will use it there, and that would be your microbiome there, causing blooms of bad bacteria. Of course, biosecurity will be there, and quantity and quality of water should always go together. You can have good quality water, but you don't have enough pressure, you don't have enough water flow, or you can have good water flow, but the water is dirty. So these things, we need to remember that we really need to go back into what is basic. And there's a lot of alternatives to antibiotics out there. From probiotics, where you feed beneficial bacteria to animals. There are prebiotics. Again, these are things that will feed the growth of good bacteria. You can also modulate with organic acids. You can modulate with natural bioactive compounds from plants, which are your phytogenics. You can use enzymes to control your NSPs, your non-starch polysaccharides. You can use proteases to increase digestibility of protein so that the animals will have, there will be little of excess protein flowing into the large intestine. I've seen products out there, bacteriophages, viruses that are specific for certain bacteria. You can use hyperimmune IgYs from eggs, and you can also use antimicrobial peptides. But what is important is, first, I want to say that you don't need to put everything in the diet to protect your chickens or to prevent and control necrotic enteritis. Believe me, it will just be cost. You have redundancy of what you're doing. What is important is you know that you have these tools in your toolbox, and depending on the situation that you see in the farms, you are able to have tools that you can pick and choose that will be appropriate for your operation. And when you are looking into antimicrobial products, the list that I have in the previous slides, you might need to think of putting two things together, and it will be additive. Ideally, it will be synergistic. What you don't want is for these two molecules that you're going to put in will be antagonistic or suppressive with each other. Example of synergy would be this one. On the left panel, you are seeing streaks of Clostridium perfringens and a streak of a Bacillus subtilis species. It's PB6. See that when you streak the PB6, you will be having the zone of inhibition. But when you combine this Bacillus subtilis PB6 with two other Bacillus species, in this case it was Bacillus subtilis G3 and Bacillus licheniformis FXA, the zone of inhibition of Clostridium perfringens was bigger, showing that multiple species of Bacillus together will have that synergistic effect on the growth of Clostridium perfringens. Okay, so today we have better understanding on the virulence factors. What are those factors that are causing on how Clostridium perfringens causes the disease, the predisposing factors leading up to necrotic enteritis. But there's still a lot of work on knowing what will be the triggers for the expression of these virulence factors. And it would be good in terms of prevention is if we know these triggers and we are able to block these triggers, then it will be a much stronger way to prevent necrotic enteritis in chickens. Lastly, replacing antibiotic requires multiple approaches, but the approaches, you have those tools in your toolbox, and you need to be conscientious enough not to put everything there, not put everything there, but you have to look for molecule solutions that will be synergistic with each other so that you get, a stronger control measure against necrotic enteritis. With that, thank you very much for listening to me. And if you have questions, I'll be happy to answer your questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alexander C. De Leon. The fifth paper to be presented for this morning plenary session is Integrated Nutrition and Feed Technology for Antibiotic Replacement.
Okay, so let us go now to the final presentation for this morning. For our last speaker for this morning plenary session, earned his bachelor's degree at Kasetsart University in Thailand. He pursued his master's degree at Asian Institute of Technology in Thailand and Doctor of Philosophy at the Tokyo University of Marine Science and Technology in Japan. He held various positions in Thailand as the Nutritionist of Sun Food and Ajinomoto, Product Research and Development Manager of Thai Union Feed Mill, Quality Assurance and Formulation Manager of Cargill Meats, and currently, he is now the Nutritionist of Cobb Asia Pacific. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Suttisak, Boonyoung.
Hello everyone, my name is Suttisak Boonyoung, Nutritionist at Cobb Asia Pacific. Sometimes you can call me Mac for shortly. Today I would like to talk about integrated nutrition and feed technology for antibiotic replacement. This is the hot issue in the current situation because we more focus on the consumer health. So the content of my presentation that I will talk today, I have like a 5 main parts. The first one, I will talk about antibiotics purposes and its impact. The next part, I will talk about gut health and also the component of the gut health. We have the 3 components of the gut health. The next one, I will talk about nutritional factor that affect on the gut health. The fourth part, I will talk about feed additives and feed supplement for gut health. And the last one is very important. I will talk about formulation strategy that can maintain the good gut health for the animals. Okay, let's start with the first part about the antibiotic purposes and its impacts. In general, antibiotics are used for like a intestinal infectious disease by bacteria. It can be used as the disease treatment. It also can be used as the disease prevention, and also it can be used as the growth promoter, or sometimes we call like a AGPS. And also, antibiotic growth promoters were banned in EU in 2006 and also were banned in US in 2017. It can be used via feed, it can be used via water, and also it can be used via oral as well. What is the impact of the antibiotics? The first one is can enhance for the chicken growth, gut health, and immune system. Why? Antibiotics can promote growth and protect the health by modifying the immune status of the broiler chicken. Additionally, it likely to remodel microbial diversity and relative abundance in the intestine. For example, it has been reported that the use of antibiotics can reduce lactobacillus that are the normal flora in the breast. It can cause the bacterial resistance in animals as well. And also the remaining or contamination of the antibiotics in the chicken meat and egg. This one is can make the problem in the consumer health. And this one is very important because the consumer health, the issue in the consumer health, that's why we try to reduce and to use antibiotic in the feed. So before starting to talk about gut health, I would like to explain you a little bit about GI tract of the birds. Okay, let's start with crop. After broiler pecking their feed pass to esophagus to crop. The primary function of crop is food storage, and it is not essential for digestion. The retention time in crop is around 15 minutes to 40 minutes, and pH around 4.5. And after that, the digester go to like a poventriculus and gizzards. In these two organs, it have mechanical and chemical digestions. In the chemical digestions, pepsinogen is activated by hydrochloric acid. The activated form of pepsinogen called like a pepsin. This is the one of the protease enzyme in proventriculus. And also for the next one is the mechanical digestion. This one is occur in the gizzards. It is the grinding of the food particle in the acid environment. The retention time here is around 33 minutes to 39 minutes. pH slightly decreased to 2.5 to 4.8. And then digester move to small intestine. It takes a longer time in the small intestine, almost 2 hours to 3 hours. pH slightly increased to 5.7 to 7.2. And also it have like a chemical digestion by enzyme to digest the complex form of the nutrient to the simple form of the nutrient. For example, protein is digested to amino acid, and also carbohydrate is digested to monosaccharide. And also in some part of the small intestine, it also have the absorption process of the nutrients as well. So, and after that, the digester move from the small intestine. It also moves to the large intestine. The pH here is around 5.5 to 7, and also the longer retention time here as well is around 205 minutes. Water and some mineral are absorbed in this organ. Undigested material are digested by microbial in this organ. So in this slide that I mentioned before, that it have three components of the gut health. The first component is immune system, and the next one is microbiota, and the last one is nutrition. And also it have the relation between immune system, microbiota, and nutrition. For example, for the nutrition, it also support for the bacterial growth, because nutrition is the prebiotic or the substrate for the bacterial growth. And also for the nutrition, it also support for the immune system. So why immune system is very important? Because if you have the good gut health, and also that you may know that 75% to 80% of the immune is produced in the GI tract of the bird. So it means that if your bird have the good gut health, they also can produce for the immune as well. So what is the microbiota? Why microbiota is very important for gut health? Microbiota can colonize quickly within 24 hours, and also it can dominate after 1 day post-hatch. It contains the diversity of the microbiota in the gut, such as bacteria, fungi, and also it have like a beneficial bacteria as well. For example, lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, and also it contains the harmful bacteria, for example, like a Clostridium. And also for the gut, it consumes 20% of the dietary energy, and the energy is also used for like a immune system. It also used by like a beneficial bacteria. It also used by like a harmful bacteria as well. And also in the gut, it also promotes for the enzyme secretion and enhance nutrient digestion. So what is the nutritional factor that affect on the gut health? We talk about immune system. We talk about microbiota that affect on the gut health. We talk about the nutrient utilization. This one also affect on the gut health, particularly when your feed contain very high soluble fiber. For the soluble fiber, I will talk in the detail why it affect on the gut health. We also talk about intestinal functions. So for this part, I will talk about the feed additives and feed supplement that can enhance gut health in broiler. The first one, enzyme, particularly NSP enzyme. I will talk in the detail that what is the type of the NSP enzyme, what is the type of the non-starch polysaccharide in the ingredients. The next one, I will talk about prebiotic and probiotic. I will explain you about the definition of prebiotic and probiotics and the relation between prebiotic and probiotics as well. The next one, organic acid. We have many types of organic acid in the market. For example, we have propionic acid. For propionic acid, normally in the market, we use propionic to prevent for the mold growth, and also we also have like a butyric acid. For the butyric, this one is like directly enhanced for the gut health. It also can increase for the villi surface. And the next one is formic acid. Normally for the formic acid, we know that this one we use to control pathogenic bacteria in the feed. And the last one, I will talk about phytogenic compounds that can enhance for gut health, because right now we talk a lot about the phytogenic compound, and also some phytogenic compound can enhance for the nutrient utilization and can reduce for the inflammatory in the gut as well. So let's start with the enzymes. Non-starch polysaccharide that I mentioned before, that I will focus on non-starch polysaccharide. So before talk about the non-starch polysaccharide enzyme, I will talk about the type of the fiber. In this one, you can see that we have two main type of the fiber. We have like a non-starch polysaccharide, and also inside like a non-starch polysaccharide, we have cellulose, we have hemicellulose, we have pectin, we have fructans, and we also have beta-glucans. And also the another one is lignin. For lignin, it cannot be digested by monogastric animals, so it should be, we talk about like ruminant animals. And also inside like a non-starch polysaccharide, we have cellulose, we have hemicellulose, we have pectin, and also we have fructan and beta-glucan. Sometimes you will heard about insoluble fiber and soluble fiber as well. Normally, soluble fiber can affect on the animal performance, because this one is can increase for the viscosity in the GI tract. So on the right side, I show about the example of non-starch polysaccharide in the ingredient. For example, arabinosaline. Normally, we found the arabinosaline in wheat, in corn, and also in DDGS. Beta-glucan, we mostly found in barley, and also the last one is beta-mannan. We also found this one in the soybean meal. So it means that when you want to select the enzyme, NHE enzyme for your diet, you should know about your substrate as well. So you should select the enzyme that's suitable with your substrate in the diet. So why enzyme can improve gut health? The first one is can reduce viscosity of the digester. The next one, it can improve nutrient digestibility or availability, particularly protein and energy. If we go to in the detail of the NSP enzyme, you can see that the nutrient matrix in the NSP enzyme, they also mention about like energy content. It can reduce the energy in the diet by 50 to 80 kcal, depending on the products. It also can reduce crude protein in the diet, and also it can reduce amino acid in the diet as well. NSP enzyme can improve gut performance because it's also reduced for the viscosity of the digester, and also it's improved for the nutrient availability. It also increased for the beneficial bacteria, and also it can reduce for the pathogenic bacteria. So for this one, probiotics, I think that you heard a lot about like a probiotic in the market. What is the probiotics? Probiotic is a live microorganisms, and also sometimes we call like a directed fed microbiota or DFM. What is the benefits of probiotic? Probiotic can reduce intestinal pH. It also can reduce intestinal bacteria, particularly harmful bacteria. It also can enhance for the digestibility. And also I show the example of probiotics in the market. We have like a Bacillus subtilis, we have Lactobacillus, we also have like a bifidobacteria. The next one is prebiotics. Prebiotic have the relation with probiotic because prebiotic is the substrate or the food for probiotics. For the prebiotic, this one is non-digestible components that stimulate bacterial growth and activities. It also, the bacteria can use prebiotic to produce short-chain fatty acid, and also I will explain you more that what is the relation between prebiotic, probiotic, and also short-chain fatty acid. In the market, we have many types of prebiotics. We have yeast cell wall, we have silane oligosaccharide or XOS. We also have mannane oligosaccharide or MOS or MOS. And also we have fructan oligosaccharide or FOS. So what is the mechanism of prebiotic and probiotic? That I mentioned before that prebiotic is the substrate or food for the probiotic. And also after probiotic use that substrate or prebiotic, it can reduce the gut pH because it's produced for the short chain fatty acid. It also can modify metabolic activity of the normal flora. It can stimulate immune function, and also it can inhibit or prevent for the colonization of harmful bacteria as well. This one like a mechanism of prebiotic and probiotic. So it means that in your for the gut health, you should have both prebiotic and probiotic, and also this one can improve a lot for the gut health as well. Okay, for the next one that I mentioned before, I will talk about organic acids. What is the definition of organic acid? Organic acid is the monocarboxylic acid, and also it has property in antimicrobial activity. It also can increase the proliferation and manipulation of the intestinal cell. This one we talk about butyric acid. And also in the market, we have many types of organic acid. We have formic acid, we have propionic acid, we also have lactic acid, butyric acid, benzoic acid, and fumaric acid. So this one I summarize about the commercial application of organic acid. The first one, formic acid. What is the effect of formic acid? Formic acid can reduce gut pH, and also the property is antimicrobial, like reduce the harmful bacteria. It also can kill for the harmful bacteria as well. The next one is propionic acid. This one also have the property like antimicrobial. The next one, butyric acid. For the butyric acid, it can increase proliferation and maturation of the intestinal cell. This one is can enhance for the gut health. The next one is citric acid. For the citric acid, it also can enhance nutrient digestibility. So the main function of the organic acid in the market, it have only three main functions. The first one, antimicrobial. The second one, it can enhance for the intestinal cell proliferation, particularly butyric acid. The last one is can enhance digestibility that I mentioned before about citric acid. However, the using of organic acid, you should consider about this problem. The first one, buffer capacity in the ingredient, or sometimes we call acid binding capacity. For the acid binding capacity, we talk about normally the high calcium ingredient, they also have very high acid binding capacity. For example, limestone. For example, monocalcium phosphate. For example, rock phosphate. So it means that if in your diet contain very high calcium, it also reduce the efficiency of organic acid. The second one, you should consider about forms of organic acid. We have many types of the form of organic acid in the market. We have like a acid form, we have like a salt form, we also have coated or uncoated form. And also the next one, you should consider about minimum inhibitory concentration. Sometimes we call like a MIC. So for the MIC, the lowest MIC is mean that this one is the lowest concentration of organic acid that can kill or can reduce the growth of the microbial activities. And the next one is microorganism. What is the target microorganism? For example, if we talk about fungi or mold, so we should consider about propionic acid. If the target microorganism is Salmonella, we should consider to use formic acid in the diet. This one like I showed for the examples. The next one is phytogenic compound, because for the phytogenic compound, right now, we talk about the phytogenic compound. We talk a lot about the essential oil that can reduce, that can improve for the gut health, and also sometimes some phytogenic compound also can reduce pathogenic bacteria in the gut system as well. What is the phytogenic compound? Phytogenic compound is the hydrophobic liquid and volatile aromatic compound that derive from the plants, from herbs, and also the property of this one is that it can interfere bacterial enzymatic system. It can reduce stress, it can improve immune response. And the next one, I show the example of phytogenic compound in the market. We have thymol, we have cinnamaldehyde, we have carvacrol, we have like a eugenol, and also we have the another type of the polyphenol like a essential oil in the market as well. However, if you want to apply phytogenic compound, essential oil in your diet, you should test it first before like a real implementation in your feed meal, because sometimes the result is like a vary depend on the environment, it depends on like a farm management as well. So I would like to remind you that if you want to apply phytogenic compound in your feed, you should test, or you should have like a small experiment to test it first, and also before like a real implementation in your feed meal. Okay, the last part that I mentioned before, that I will talk about formulation strategies. For the formulation strategy, this one also can maintain for the good gut health, and also can improve for the gut health as well. What is the formulation strategy that can improve gut health or maintain for the good gut health? We talk about the optimum fibers. This one we will talk about soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. We also talk about the pellet quality and particle size. We also talk about the reduced risk from the anti-nutrients. So let's start with the fiber. Why fiber is very important for bird? Actually, it have four main roles of the dietary fiber for the bird, and also this one can enhance for the growth performance. The first one is it can enhance for the GI tract development. The second one is can enhance for the nutrient utilization. It also can enhance for the microbiota, and also the next one, it can enhance for the immune system. So if we talk about the GI tract development in the bird, we talk about the insoluble fiber. Why? Because insoluble fiber may increase the retention in the upper part of the GI tract, and this one is resulting in like a gizzard development. It also can stimulate hydrochloric acid from the proventriculus and lowering pH in the upper gut. It also can expand for the proventriculus and gizzard as well, due to like when we increase for the particle size of the insoluble fiber. This one is have been reported in many research that the particle size is related to like a gizzard size, and also is also related to like a nutrient utilization. So that I mentioned before about the insoluble fiber. Insoluble fiber, what is the benefit of insoluble fiber? Insoluble fiber can enhance the gizzard function and weight that I mentioned before. It can stimulate hydrochloric acid in proventriculus like a mechanical receptor. It also can reduce pathogen colonization, and also it can dilation of the proventriculus as well. We talk about the coarse fiber, we talk about the particle size of the grain. What is the problem of the soluble fiber? For the insoluble fiber, it have the benefit. If you have the optimum insoluble fiber, it means that you can enhance for the nutrient utilization, you can enhance for the GI tract development. However, it should be in the optimum level. It's not too low and also it's not too high. So in terms of the soluble fiber, for the soluble fiber, this one we talk about the soluble fiber in wheat, in corn, because for the soluble fiber, it can forming viscous gel, and also it can increase viscosity in the GI tract, and it can reduce the digestion and absorption of the nutrient. And this one, the reduction of the digestion and absorption of the nutrient is effect on the growth performance. And inside, when it's increased for the viscosity in the GI tract, it also can reduce oxygen. And after the oxygen is reduced, it also increase the colonization of an anaerobe microflora. And this one is effect on the gut ecology. So I summarize this one that for the fiber that relate to the gut microbiota, high soluble fiber can increase pathogen colonization. It's also low tolerable condition and fast digester, fast passage. This one is can affect on the less microbiota. And many soluble fiber, they also have the function. They don't have like the disadvantage, they also have the advantage as well for the soluble fiber. For example, we talk about beta-glucan, but you should have the optimum level of the soluble fiber, because sometimes the property is act like a prebiotic, and fiber level may modify the growth and composition of the microbiota as well. That I mentioned before, that you should have the optimum level. It's not too high or it's not too low in the diet. And the next one, I will talk a little bit about the pellet quality and particle size. For the pellet quality and particle size, why feed milling process are very important on the pellet quality and particle size, because if we talk about the pellet quality, what is the factor that affect on the pellet quality? You can see in the presentation that 40% that affect on the pellet quality is come from feed formulation. So it means that if you have some ingredient is too high in the diet or too low in the diet, this one is effect on the feed. This one is effect on the pellet quality. The next one is particle size. Normally, the bigger particle size is also reduced for the surface area. And also, after it's reduced for the surface area, it also affects on the pellet quality. And the next one is conditioning process. Because when we talk about conditioning process, we talk about the heat treatment. We also talk about the moisture content in the conditioning process. So it has three factors in the conditioning process. The first one, times. The second one is temperature. And the third one is moisture. So you should have the enough time, optimum moisture, and also optimum temperature that can improve for the gelatinization. And this one, it affects on the pellet quality. And also in the conditioning process, not only effect on the pellet quality, is also reduced for the pathogenic bacteria as well, because this one, like a heat treatment process, is also reduced for the pathogenic bacteria and effect on the gut health. So in this graph, I show about the pellet quality factor. Normally, the higher number is mean that this ingredient can improve for the pellet quality. For example, the wheat have the egg number 8. So it means that when you use wheat in the diet, it can improve pellet quality. In the opposite side, like a DDGS, you can see that the scoring is number 3. So it means that if you use very high inclusion of DDGS, it can reduce pellet quality as well. In this slide, I show the pellet quality guideline. For example, in the starter feed, normally we use the crumble feed, and the parameter we should measure about 5 should be less than 10%, and oversize should be less than 25%. In the grower feed, we use the crumble or pellet feed. It depends on the boiler weight or age. The fat content should be less than 10%. And this one we talk about PDI or pellet durability index. It should maintain between 90 to 95%. And the next one is finisher feed. Normally we use like a pellet feed. Again, the fat content should be less than 10%. And PDI should be between 90 to 95%. In this slide, I show the maximum limit of the ingredient that you can use in the feed. However, this one like a guideline, so you can apply or adjust from this guideline as well. For example, corn. Corn is no limitation to use in the feed. However, the limitation of corn is that when you use very high inclusion of corn, you will see the problem in the pellet quality. And also wheat can use between 15% to 25%, and sometimes it go up to 60%. But when you use like a wheat in your diet, you should consider to use like a silanate enzyme in the diet. So for this one, for the gut health, I would like to summarize in this one that for the gut health, for the nutrition we talk about fiber, we talk about the particle size, because fiber and particle size, this one can enhance for the gut health. And also for the fiber, some fiber, if you have the optimum like inclusion of the fiber, this one sometimes that I mentioned before, that the property is look like prebiotic, and it is the substrate for the microbiota. And for the microbiota, this one we talk about probiotics. And probiotic, this one, the factor that affect on the microbiota, we talk about probiotic. We talk about the organic acid, because for the organic acid, it can reduce gut pH, and this one like a have like a good arrangement for the microbiota. And microbiota can produce for the short chain fatty acid, and short chain fatty acid can enhance for the immune function. And for the immune function, we also talk about like a glucan. We also talk about the algae life. We also talk about phytogenic compound that can enhance for the immune function. And that I mentioned before that 70 to 80% of the immune, this one is produced from gut. So for the take-home message of my presentation is the first one, gut health is important system for broiler production. Gut health component include immune system, nutrition, and microbiota. Feed additive and feed supplement for antibiotic replacement should enhance gut health and nutrient utilization. Feed formulation is another strategy to maintain the good gut health. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Boonyoung. Now, we will proceed with the open forum. May we call on screen our plenary speakers, Dr. Ruturaj Patil, Ms. Arlene Opelanio, Dr. Fernando Robert Yu, Dr. Alexander De Leon, and Dr. Suttisak Boonyoung. May we call Dr. Nancy Romano to moderate the open forum.
How's everyone? Kumusta po tayo? Are still ano pa ba tayo? Gising na gising pa ba tayo? Actually, papunta pa lang tayo sa most exciting part ng ating morning session. Okay, so we hope that we all enjoyed listening to our brilliant speakers, no? So we are now opening the question and answer forum in order for us to help us to digest and clarify the information presented. Again, we are inviting everyone to participate, and let us check the speakers if they are on stand mode. Okay, so let us call Dr. Patil, present, Miss Opelanio, I should say, then Dr. Yu, Dr. De Leon, and Dr. Boonyoung. Okay, so the first question. So this is for Dr. Patil. Okay, with the new approaches of helping away from antibiotic use in growth promotion, will the rise of antimicrobial resistance be the same?
Okay, you can just confirm me if you can hear me. Very clear?
Okay, so I will repeat the question, Dr. Patil. With the new approaches of keeping away from antibiotic use in growth promotion, will the rise of antimicrobial resistance be the same?
Yeah, so it's a good question, in fact, and that was also one of the key message of my presentation, that when we actually promote the use of novel gut health additive coming from non-antibiotic sources, actually we are giving as an alternative to minimize the need of antibiotics. And one of the example what I shown from a case study from Netherlands of over 20 years of study, it's shown that when you actually reduce the use of antibiotics, some of the bacteria will always phase out the resistance gene, because when they are not exposed to antibiotic over the period, they will lose the resistance, and that will definitely will help us to reverse the antimicrobial resistance. So in short, yes, the use of novel gut health additive will definitely help us to minimize the antimicrobial resistance, and it will also help to even improve the efficacy of available antimicrobials for further use in our industry.
Okay, well said, Dr. Patil. Thank you. Okay, let us go now to the second question to be addressed to Ms. Opelanio. Okay, hello, Ms. Ayen. Okay, here is your question. How much of soybean meal and or fish meal inclusion can be economically substituted by single-cell protein?
Thank you, Dr. Nancy. The question is really very relevant nowadays under Philippine scenario with high prices of our proteins right now. According to our experiences handling the feed mill formulations, we can even replace 100% during the time that soybean meal rise as high as 60 pesos per kilo. But nowadays, with a range of around 30 to 40 pesos per kilo, we can maximize it at least 3% for broilers and then layers as well. Both for soybean meal and both for fish meal ingredients.
Okay, so thank you for clarifying, Ms. Ayan, about the inclusion of SCP. no? Then let us go now to Dr. Yu. Okay, so your question is this. What is the best disinfection process you can recommend for downtime of poultry houses?
Okay, good morning, everybody. No, so I was reading this question, trying to decipher the exact intent. So, if you're saying the best disinfectant have a longer downtime, if that's one way to decipher it, then any disinfectant which has a biocide which has very good residual qualities, and the best one for that are the quaternary ammoniums, and then maybe after that followed by the glutaraldehydes. Okay, for that particular aspect. However, if you're asking me what's the best disinfection process to do on the house during downtime, that's a bit difficult because in the first place, the definition of downtime is that the house is resting and nobody is supposed to go inside. So definitely, if you want to do liquid disinfection, you can't do that. So maybe means like other technologies like UV light, we just turn on the light, where you let the light disinfect the surfaces, or maybe inject ozone in a closed house. Or maybe if you have it, you can also do hot fogging with the automatic hot fogging machines, not the manual ones, the automatic ones where you can leave that overnight. But technically speaking, if you say downtime, the house is supposed to be at rest and should not be disturbed.
Okay, thank you, Doc Yu. No, that is very comprehensive answer. Okay, so let us go now to the first speaker, Dr. De Leon. So, you mentioned that Clostridium perfringens is abundant in the intestine of chicken, and that the NET-B gene plays a key role in necrotic enteritis. However, this gene is also found in both healthy chickens and those with disease. So would you say that the issue is not on controlling this bacteria, but in the management as its interaction with other microorganisms?
That's a very good question and also a complex one to answer. But let me try to answer that one. So yes, Clostridium perfringens in the flock with the NET-B gene can be there and not be there. The missing link right now in what we know is what is that stimulus that will make that Clostridium perfringens carrying the NET-B gene express that NET-B gene. We do not know that yet. But what we know today is the number of Clostridium perfringens in the gut will actually determine whether you have normal, you have subclinical, or you have clinical cases. So it's still worthwhile to make sure that you have control over this number of Clostridium perfringens, because you really do not know where you have commensal or you have Clostridium perfringens with the NET-B gene. Although there are test kits today in the market that will help you determine that, will help you quantify, and will also help you determine if you have that Clostridium perfringens with the NET-B gene. So again, putting in molecules to replace antibiotic, I think there were a lot of good discussion with the other speakers on this one. What is important is that when you choose your molecule, it is appropriate to what you have in your situation in your farm.
Okay, so thank you, Doc De Leon. No, actually, we need to understand the mechanism of this microorganism, no, in order for us to really get the approach on how to balance this microorganism. Okay, so let us proceed now to the last speaker, Dr. Boonyoung. Okay, so
Yes.
your question is here. So what is the acceptable limits of soluble fibers in diets?
Okay, very good question. Actually, right now, if I calculate it on the research, right now the ratio between soluble fiber and insoluble fiber is around 20% and 80%. So it means that if the total fiber content in the boiler feed is around 4%, so the maximum of the soluble fiber it should be around not higher than 1%, not higher than 1%. This one.
So we understand now that not all the fibers are bad, no? So we need some
Yeah,
portion of
right.
this, no, in order for us to balance the gut health. Okay, so
Yes,
thank you, Dr. Boonyoung. No, so let us have for the second round of our questions. So this is the question is for Dr. Patil. Okay, so your second question is, in the economic and business perspective, is it workable, the so-called no antibiotic ever production?
Yeah, it's. I would consider it's a tough question, in fact, and I agree. It's not going to be easy to completely shift to non-antibiotic additives because I would say it's not a silver bullet that you can manage the gut health or overall health of the birds by completely replacing antibiotics or only replacing antibiotics. It has to have a kind of a comprehensive health program by also need to be adapting the biosecurity measures and other management practices being followed in the farm, which can also help us to reduce the need of antibiotics. So, in fact, that is one of the way. And now with the recent researches, it has been proven that the phytomolecule best solutions are effective one. But to make them effective, it's also not that easy because you have to have a reliable sources and also the quality of the product, which is the most difficult part when it comes to phytogenic solutions. And I was seeing in the Q&A, there was also another question coming to me about based on that only, how you would like to monitor the phytogenic solutions, which is in line with that, because I would say formulating a phytogenic product is not very difficult these days. There are a lot of information available on the web. So anyone can go and formulate the product. But the most difficult thing in phytogenic product is to have a consistent benefit, which is very difficult if you don't have understanding about which phytomolecule at what level can exhibit required mode of action. And by having that knowledge, yes, we can also make a very effective phytomolecule solutions by bringing the right synergy of different actives. Further, we also need to ensure those actives are stable during the field processing and been available at the right site in the gut. So I agree that this is not a short answer to tackle the antibiotic resistance problem, but yes, we have to have a comprehensive program to reduce the need of antibiotics and still further control the impact on the performance of the birds.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Patil. Actually, if we review all the presentations for this morning, we can really identify what will be the answer for this question. Okay, so let us go now for the second round question for Miss Opelanio. Actually, this is a follow-up question from the first question that we asked you. Okay, so how consistent is the supply or availability of single protein here in the Philippines?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. In the Philippines, I would say we're very glad and honored that we started this journey of developing the specialty proteins. We're the first to handle it here for the past 5 years, and I believe everybody now is ready to supply because there are other players who keep on developing as well as we started the dried fermentation biomass. So far, the bacteria-based proteins are available. The yeast-based proteins are also available, whether it's coming from lysine-based DFB or coming from glutamic-based DFB, and of course, our yeast-based proteins are always here.
Okay, so thank you, Miss Ayan, for the update. No? Okay, so let us go now to Dr. Yu, our very own. No? So here is your question, another second question. Assuming having an effective cleaning program, how many disinfections do we need to do every cycle?
You do a good cleaning program and if you do a good disinfection program, technically just once. Repeat disinfections and even downtime is basically a statement that you don't really trust the process. If you do it properly with good cleaning disinfection, you get to achieve, as I described, the definition of a log 4 for viruses and log 5 kill for bacteria. So if you manage to do that in the entire house, all the surfaces, then technically once is enough. But then again, if you're not confident regarding the entire process, then repeat disinfections should be done. And but in most cases, I see that twice it should be more than enough if you do it properly. Again, if you do it properly and use the proper agent, because if you don't do it properly and you pick the wrong biocide or chemical agent, even if you do it 10 times, it still won't work.
Yeah, it's just like having a vaccine, no? We have a second dose, no? But one application is enough, no? But of course, in terms of insurance, so we need a second application. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Yu. So let us go now to Dr. De Leon, no? For your second question. How feasible is a non-antibiotic therapy in the management of necrotic enteritis? Has this approach been proven successfully in the management of necrotic enteritis on a commercial scale?
The answer will be yes. So again, it's not as simple as putting in there. I think one of our speakers said there's no magic bullet, but it is doable. But one thing you need to understand is going antibiotic free, whether to control necrotic enteritis or other gut health pathogens. It is always a journey, and this journey needs to be plotted out. This journey requires a lot of changes, not only in the operations in the grow out farm, but it will extend to the breeder farm as well as in the way you structure your feed, and also the way you will structure the nutrients of your feed. So it is doable. I know several operations that does this, but again, it is not an overnight thing. It requires a lot of change within the operation, a lot of change within the mindset of people working in the operation.
Okay, so well said, Dr. De Leon. Okay, so let us go now to the last question, no, for Dr. Boonyoung. Okay, so
Yes.
if a ration have high calcium content, like the layer, what is the best organic acids that you can recommend? Since you mentioned that high calcium can reduce the efficacy of acids.
Okay, this one very good question. Normally for the organic acid that I would like to recommend, it depends on the target microbial that you want to reduce. For example, if you want to reduce the effect from the fungi, you should use like a propionic acid. If you want to reduce like a salmonella content, you should use like a formic acid something. So in this case, it means that the high calcium, this one is effect all organic acid. So it means that you should increase for the concentration, or you should increase the level of the organic acid in your diet. Okay, this one, the final answer is that increase the inclusion level of the concentrations.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Boonyoung. Okay, so with this, no, the learning from this morning plenary session, that using of it is not a single bullet approach, no, for keeping away from antibiotics, but it is multifactorial approach. Okay, so thank you very much to our lady and gentlemen for gracing this morning session. But before we end this session, we would like to present the plaque of appreciation to our speakers, and may we ask our speakers to stay online. And I just want to read the certificate of appreciation. So this is for Dr. Patil, Miss Opelanio, soon to be doctor, okay, Dr. Yu, Dr. Alexander De Leon, and Dr. Boonyoung. Okay, so for having served as a resource speaker during the 2022 PCPP Poultry School Online with the theme, Strengthening the Poultry Industry Towards Sustainable Recovery, via digital platform on October 8 and 9, 2022. Given this 9th day of September 2022, signed Maria Cynthia de la Cruz, Esmeraldo San Pedro, and Generoso Rene Romo Jr. So we are now at the end of our morning plenary session. Again, we thank you, our speakers, and everyone for participating. No, we can now take our lunch break and come back for afternoon plenary session at exactly 1:30 p.m. Again, this is Dr. Nancy Salamanca Romano signing off.